morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from around the globe today. Just a quick review of today's agenda. We will start off with taking a look at the architecture and some conceptual overview of Control-M Self-Service, followed by a demo, and then my favorite part, the Q&A session. So this architecture that we're looking at right now is something that most of you are probably familiar with. At the top here we see Enterprise Manager Server, which has some of these components that you are very familiar with, such as GSR representing the GUI server, GAS representing the Global Alert Server. Control-M Self-Service is just another component inside the Enterprise Manager Server. When you install Control-M Enterprise Manager Server, you may not see self-service there right away because in most cases it's a licensed add-on, or it's maybe already part of your license, but it's something you have not activated yet. Once you install and activate it, it will just appear as another component inside your Control-M Configuration Manager under the EM components. Now, self-service is a web-based interface to your active environment of your jobs. So the web piece where it is deployed is on the Tomcat's web server, which is bundled with the Control-M Enterprise Manager. Now, to take advantage of self-service, you have to be at least version 7 or higher. So the web server, by the way, is not something new. We've been packaging a web server since version 6.4 for various other web deployments such as Web Launch and Batch and Pack Manager. In 6.4, we used to have Jetty that we used to bundle as a web server. And starting with version 7, we switched to Tomcat, which is more of an industry standard. So once you install and activate self-service, there is nothing that you have to deploy on the web server or anything. It is ready to use the moment you activate it. The rest of the architecture looks pretty standard, Enterprise Manager connecting to some Control-M servers, agents here. So no prereqs need to be done before self-service, no database configurations or anything of that sort. It's just another component inside. The installation is actually very, very simple, simply because you are activating the product once you download the media and install it. So it really has 3 steps. You check with your sales rep to make sure you are licensed for self-service. You download it from the electronic product download side, and you just install it on the Enterprise Manager server where you have the rest of the components installed right now. Once you have the media, the actual install will probably only take 2 to 3 minutes. Okay. So I will now switch over to a demo environment. Okay. So for today's presentation, we will be using Control-M version 8. There have not been many changes between version 7 and version 8 from a self-service standpoint. There's no new functionality or anything, but the interface does look a little different. So for those of you who may not have had a chance to look at version 8, today would also be a good opportunity to familiarize yourself with what version 8 looks like. The interface is dramatically different, and maybe this will be a good time for you to see where things are in version 8. One of the things you'll notice here is that we don't have EM GUI and Control-M Desktop separately. It has all been combined here into what we call the Workload Automation Client. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as an administrator right now. Okay, so this is what the new interface looks like for those of you who may not have had a chance to see it. There's a concept of these domains. Planning is what Control-M Desktop used to be. This is where you would create your jobs and edit the jobs. Monitoring is what your Enterprise Manager GUI used to be. This is where your viewpoints would be. And history is where you would find your archive viewpoints. Forecast is, of course, for those of you who have Control-M Forecast installed, can leverage the forecast domain. And tools is where you will find access to Control-M Configuration Manager, reporting facility, and some other stuff. So let's take a quick look at the architecture like we talked about. I have self-service installed and deployed here. So you can see this is just another component here in the CCM along with the rest of the components. Because I am on version 8 here, the web server is also now part of the EM components in the configuration manager. This was really added for convenience instead of having to start and stop the web server from either Windows services if you were running on Windows or through root menu. You can now control it through the configuration manager. So as you can see, everything here is running on this host called Trout. So is the GUI server and the self-service. We'll here shortly look at the web interface, but before we go there, we want to consider some use cases of how self-service can be used and what are some of the reasons you would want to use self-service. So this is what my active environment looks like. It's a small environment here in my lab. So we've got some processes here. We'll take a look at, for example, the billing process. One use case could be that, let's say I have a billing operations group who currently does have access to the either the Enterprise Manager GUI or the Workload Automation client, but maybe we want to expose these jobs to the billing operations group via a web interface. This is a use case very similar to probably your corporate email. For example, at BMC here we use Microsoft Exchange, and I have an Outlook client installed on my laptop. But I also have access to my email through a web console, which I can access from anywhere I have access to the internet, basically. Now, the Outlook client is full feature, has a lot more features. Some of the ones that I like is maybe starting a WebEx meeting directly from Outlook and stuff. I can't do that from the web client, but it is there for convenience purposes and do some of the basic stuff. So the same concept here, while maybe the billing operations group has full access through the EM client or the workload automation client installed on their laptops, but providing more flexibility and access to control them through a web interface. So taking that use case, we will now look at how we can provision the billing process through self-service and give the billing operations group access to it. A quick look at the billing operations group. Another quick note here in version 8, we have moved the authorizations inside the configuration manager, which I believe is its rightful place because it's an administrative function. Prior to version 8, it used to be inside the EM GUI or the Control M desktop. So over here, I have the billing operations group, and I have Robert Smith as a member of this group, and the goal right now is to provide Robert Smith access to the billing jobs through self-service. So the first step would be to create a service, define a service, and for that we'll go to the planning domain, and if you're on version 7, you would go to Control M Desktop, and from Tools, we will go to Service Definitions. From here, we will look to define a new service. Now, there are two types of services you can define. One is a service definition, and one is a service rule. The key distinction between the two is that a service definition will create one service based on the criteria you specify. A service rule will create multiple services based on the criteria you specify. We'll start off with a service definition, and then we'll take a look at service rule in another example. First screen here is just asking for some general information. So maybe I'll call this billing process. And now I have 4 options. Service based on filter. It's basically saying, okay, you provide some criteria and we'll build a service on that. The second option is service per order date based on a filter saying, okay, you provide some criteria and we'll create a service based on the order date and the criteria. Service per smart folder is basically if you have smart folders or what used to be called group schedules, you can define the criteria and it will take the group schedules and break them up into services. Or you can define some criteria and create a service based on each job. In our example, we'll take service based on a filter. The next screen here is asking you to fill out some criteria information. It's basically asking you, okay, out of your active environment or your defined environment, what is it that you want to create a service on? So in my case, I want to create the billing folder. By the way, a quick note here, folder is the new terminology. There's some terminology changes in version 8 as well. What we used to call tables or scheduling tables are now called folders. So billing is the folder I want to expose via self-service. This last screen doesn't apply here in our case because we're not creating an orderable service. We will be looking at an orderable service later on in the demo, so this piece will make a little bit more sense then. At this point, I think we're ready to just click Finish. Okay, so we've created the service. Now comes the aspect of how do we give the billing group access to this service. For that, I'll go back to the Configuration Manager and go to the Security. Once you install self-service, you will see that there is a Services tab as well. This is what will define what services does a particular group have access to. Okay. Now, let's say we're just testing. This is the first time we're interacting with self-service. We just click Add, and we say, well, how about I just put an asterisk here? And I go ahead and check everything. All these options here, drill down to view jobs, run orderable services, hold, resume. These are things that apply at the service level. This is not going to change any authorizations at the job level or anything else. And this will make more sense once we actually log into self-service. So let's say I put an asterisk here. I'm just getting started. So I'll open everything up for this group and see what happens. To make sure I did, okay, yes, I did save it. So once self-service is installed, you can access it simply by typing in the name of the machine followed by the default port, and it will bring up the self-service interface. So I'm running on a machine name called Trout, and the default port that self-service is, the Tomcat web server is listening on is 18080, and it automatically puts in this suffix of self-service. So I want to log in as Robert Smith and see what it looks like. A quick note here, this interface that you see here is built on the underlying technology of Microsoft Silverlight. If your browser, either Internet Explorer or Firefox does not have Silverlight installed, it will prompt you to install it. It's typically a 30-second install that you can just click from your browser and get started. So I'll log in as Robert Smith. Another thing to keep in mind here is that anyone who has a login, so if I go back here to my authorizations, Robert Smith was a user already defined here. So anyone who has a login and can log into the EM GUI or the workload automation client can also log into self-service. What they will see inside self-service will depend on the level of authorizations we give them. So Robert Smith was already defined user, and we will now log in and see what can Robert see through self-service. So we gave Robert access to everything. So in addition to billing, there are some other services that Robert is able to see. Now, one interesting thing here is if I go back to the list of services I have currently defined here, is that I did not define a service called payroll here. However, there is a payroll service that is visible here. Now that is because this is a batch and pack manager service. So for those of you who have both self-service and batch and pack manager, will be able to control both batch and pack manager services as well as the self-service groups that you create here. So let's see, we'll go ahead and double click the billing service and take a look at the jobs inside. So these are the same jobs we were looking at through the workload automation client just a minute ago. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the options that we can that are available to interact with this job. The first screen is giving you just some general information. The log is what is similar to when you would right-click a job in your EM GUI or the workload automation client and select log. Output is what you would get by right-clicking a job and selecting sysout. So those are some of the actions available, and we'll be taking a look at some of the others here shortly as well. But quickly going back to the services view, now that Robert can see payroll here, let's see if he can actually load the jobs of the payroll service. Now, interestingly, nothing came up for Robert, and we'll take a look why. So for that, we'll go back to the authorizations. We'll take a look at the billing operations group. So the billing operations group, the services panel, we said, well, allow them access to all services. Okay. However, once you double-click a service and start loading jobs, a different layer of security kicks in, and this is the active tab, which has always been there. And this is what defines what jobs can you see once you're logged in through self-service or your EM GUI. So over here, we're restricting this group to application name CCB, which holds the billing process. So the important thing to note here is that while we gave them access to everything, Robert couldn't open up anything and access anything he doesn't have access to. It's just at the service layer, full access was given. Same thing with the backup service. It will also give the same error saying no data found or permissions to view job. Okay. So now that we got our first look at self-service, we're like, okay, maybe we don't want to expose anything. Even though they can't actually look at the jobs, we want to limit them to just the billing one. So go ahead and log out here and go back to the authorizations. And in the services, let me change this and say, well, I want to limit them to a prefix of anything that starts with bill. Okay, now we can see that Robert can only view the billing process here. Another neat feature here is that you can see that even though this is not a batch impact manager service where we've not defined an SLA for this, based on the history of the runtimes of the jobs inside the service, self-service gives you a start and end time, expected start and end time. So this started at 7 o'clock, which was new day, and based on the history of the jobs, it's predicting that this set of jobs should complete by 12:04. Okay. So let's go back to our active environment and consider another example. We'll take a look at this flow called inventory management. This is a slightly longer flow, and as the name of the folder indicates, that this is doing something with inventory. But as you may experience in your environments, that a group or a table, which can have maybe hundreds or thousands of jobs in some cases, is actually accomplishing multiple steps. So while overall this is managing inventory, there may be some sub-processes that are happening here. And if we look at this flow, maybe the first jobs here at the top are waiting for some files. And when those files come in, maybe we are doing some calculations for the inventory. So those jobs have, they all start with INV, but calc indicates that this is a job that's doing some kind of a calculation. And if we go further down below here, maybe after the calculation's complete, we're now in the process of ordering it. When self-service was being developed, prior to that, we did some research on how do users interact with the jobs. And what we found was two things that really stood out. that typically people are either interested in the overall process and knowing how is inventory management doing as a whole, or they're interested in just a sub-process, which typically is maybe a job somewhere in the flow and maybe a few jobs above it and a few jobs below it. We didn't find any cases where people were interested in every single job inside a table at any given point. So if I have 30 jobs here, I'm probably not interested in all 30 of them at the same time. While I do have an interest in understanding probably how is the inventory calculation process going, how is the inventory file process going, and how is the inventory order process going within the overall inventory management process. Taking this use case, maybe it makes sense to break up this into 3 different groups because there are 3 different functions happening inside this process. The first is the file, the second is calculations, and the last part is ordering. And how am I identifying that this is a file transfer and this is a calculation? Looks like I can identify that based on the naming convention here. Now, naming conventions are very important, and the better naming conventions you have, the easier it is for you to manage your batch schedule, and this is regardless of self-service, right? So in my case, it looks like I've got a prefix followed by a 4-letter, another prefix here or suffix here in the middle that will allow me to identify what this is. Now, let's see in self-service, how can I define that? Now, in the interest of time, I did have one set up, but we will walk through it. So this time, this is a service rule and not service definition, which if I was creating a brand new one, I would just simply go here. So let's take a look at what I have defined here in inventory management. So this is some general information. The name is inventory management. Now, notice this button down here, or checkbox called active. Once I click it, it will actually become active and show the service inside the self-service interface. So now that I do want to activate it, I have checked this box. If you wanted to deactivate it, you would simply come back here and uncheck it, and it will be deactivated. Again, it's asking me here, okay, out of the active environment or out of your defined environment, what piece is it that you want to create services on? So I want to create services on the inventory management folder. And this screen is now asking, the grouping section is asking, okay, how do you want to slice this up? Okay, so I want to slice this up based on application and the job name. And I want to use the first 8 characters of the job name to create this grouping. And we'll actually get to see what this exactly means in just the next screen here. Couple of options down below here. Generate service per smart folder. If you have smart folders, or what used to be called group schedules, you can group everything based on that, or you could group based on the jobs that match the criteria that we defined here in the selection criteria. Going to the next screen, it's asking, okay, what type of naming convention do you want to use for the inventory management jobs? In this case, I would like to use job name. The options that are available here are going to be what I selected on this screen below, on the previous screen. So here I select the application and job name. So if I go here, those will be the only 2 options available to me. And in this case, I only want to use job name. The description of it, I will just go ahead and use job name here as well. Clicking next. Now, based on the criteria, this is actually a really cool screen because it tells you, okay, based on the criteria and grouping that you've selected, here's how many services you'll get. And it was because I used the first 8 characters of the job name, it has used and sliced that up into 3 different groups. So if we count here, INV being the first 3 characters, underscores the 4th, and calc being the last 4 characters. So that's how it counted the 8 characters. And I was really able to leverage this because of the naming convention I use. Okay, and in some cases you may need to have some tribal knowledge, if you will, of your scheduling environment to figure out what those naming conventions are and then slice things up based on that. These 2 columns here are showing that based on the criterion grouping we specified, this is how many jobs were found in the definition. Let me see what's going on here. Let's see the active. Okay, so I currently have 10 jobs that are active in Calc. Okay. So we've created this service, and you notice that this now has this word active next to it. This indicates that this service will be visible once we log in. Now, another use case here is that, okay, the inventory management process was maybe available to the operations team who manages the inventory management process, but maybe we want to give the application developers who create the scripts that are automated by Control-M, maybe we want to give them access to their jobs as well, right? Maybe they get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, your job has failed, instead of then just going and fixing the script and then calling back and saying, okay, I've fixed the script, go ahead and rerun the job. Maybe they can just use self-service, which is a web-based interface, don't have to have access to the full Control-M client, and look at the output of the job and fix the script and rerun it without having to involve multiple groups. So I will now go back to security, and I have a pre-built group here called Inventory Management, and maybe I want to give Jason Andrews, who's one of the application developers, access to these jobs from Inventory Management. So going to the Services tab, just like the billing process, we can give them access to the type of services we want to, and in this case, we want to give them access to anything that starts with a prefix of INV. And if we look at the Active tab, they're limited to application SAP, which is where the inventory management process is. So they'll only be able to see the jobs that are inside application SAP and services that start with the prefix of INV. So let's go to self-service and now log in as Jason Andrews. Okay, so we can now see that Jason has access to these three distinct groups. Instead of looking at inventory management as one big chunk, it is now divided into three processes that make business sense. One has to do with file transfers, one has to do with the ordering, and one has to do with the calculation. We load some of these jobs here. Maybe you want to look at the output of one of these jobs. And this is just a demo environment, so most of these jobs are just running a sleep command. But you can view the output here, and if I wanted, I could go ahead and issue a rerun on it. And we'll see this will change here shortly. It is now running based on the rerun we've issued here. Okay, going back to the active environment, let's consider another example. Now, there may be instances where your teams, scheduling teams get requests for running some ad hoc jobs, maybe jobs that are doing some kind of reporting and reports needed on an ad hoc basis are requested, and then somebody schedules them and puts them in the active environment. I have something similar here, so I'll take a look at one of the reporting jobs. Okay, so just taking your example a little forward here, the reporting job here maybe creates a list of customers. Okay, and let's take a look at the properties of this job. And one of the auto-edit variables maybe is country. Maybe we want to specify what country do we need the list from, and by default maybe it is U.S. So we can use self-service to give access to those end users who are making those ad hoc requests to go ahead and run these ad hoc jobs on their own without having to call anybody else. To be able to do that, we need to create an orderable service. So I'll go to the service definitions that I already have open here. Now I have a service rule already created in the interest of time, but we will walk through it. Ad hoc customer list. When you're creating an orderable service through a service rule, make sure that the active box is not checked because we're not trying to activate it. The service will become active once somebody orders it, so make sure that is unchecked. Again, select your criteria. So in this case, I want to select the reporting application, and I want to generate the service on the reporting job itself. The properties here, the naming convention, I want to use the job name. I have defined some custom description here. And then down here, I can check the orderable box. And if I want to pass some parameters to the report before I order it, in that case, I will check the automatically add orderable parameters to each service box as well. And now it's showing me the customer list service rule. Once you have created that, the next step is to generate services from rule. Check the orderable service that we had created earlier and click on generate, and this will now generate the customer list orderable service definition. Okay. Now let me log out, and this time I log in as administrator, so you'll get to see a full view of all the services that are now active. Okay, so these are all the services that are currently active now. If I go and click on this button here called Order Service, it is now showing me the orderable service that I had created in the step earlier. Click Next. Now it's asking me to pass a parameter. I can, if I leave it blank, it'll just take the default US parameter, or I can override it and maybe say, maybe use a different code, maybe MX for Mexico. And it's now telling me that it has been ordered. And shortly here we will, and it is now available as a service. One more important thing to keep in mind from a security standpoint is that when you are creating or giving somebody access to an orderable service, you have to make sure that they have access to ordering that through the Folders tab, or what used to be called the Tables tab. Nothing is new here in terms of authorizations except for the Services tab itself. Everything else uses the same underlying Enterprise Manager security that you're used to all along. So in this case, you have to they have access to all folders with an update access level. For those of you who have mainframe environments, another thing to keep in mind is that if you are creating an orderable service and maybe this is a user that has never existed in the Control-M environment before and you just created an ID in in Enterprise Manager, you will also need to make sure that they have a valid, that ID is also valid on the mainframe, because that's another layer with the mainframe, is that the ID also has to exist on the mainframe side to be able to order it. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, nothing new. This is exactly how it would work if you were allowing somebody access to order jobs through the Enterprise Manager or the Workload Automation Client. Same rules apply with self-service. Okay. Another neat feature here is the history view. You can go back and look at the history of the services. So maybe I want to go back Friday the 10th, and this is showing me the status of all the services here. Now, let's see if I can drill down. Let's pick billing. Okay, the reason we didn't get any jobs here is because the service history, again, going back to the point I was making earlier, there is a service layer and then there's the jobs layer. Okay, the service layer is available 30 days back, but the jobs that I can drill down into will depend on how many archive viewpoints am I saving, or old nets, and that by default is only 2. So today is the 15th, and I've gone back to the 10th, which is about 5 days ago. So while I can get an overall view of how the service did, I can't drill down into the jobs because the jobs data was not saved that far back. If I go back to the 14th, I should be able to look at the jobs inside. Okay, this was billing process. Let me see for billing. Okay, I think there is something odd with my environment. Maybe I haven't, maybe I only have it for 1 day. I'll check that here in a minute. But the idea is if you're saving 2 days worth of archive viewpoints, then you should be able to drill down into at least 2 days worth of jobs through the history here. I'll take a look at that in just a second here. Another quick good use case here is maybe management wants, there's interest at the management level to just be able to keep track of a very high level of status for all the different services that have been created. Let's consider that example and take a group. Let's say I've got a manager's group, and I've got Mary Jones, who's a manager, given her an account here, and on the services tab, I can give Mary access to all the services. However, I can limit on what Mary can do once she's logged in. So maybe I don't give her access to drilling down. I don't give her access to ordering any services, holding or running, or viewing orderable services that were started by others. Maybe for the access level, I'll just say, update and click OK. And on the active tab, we've given her access to everything. So while Mary can get a full view as a manager, can get a full view of all the services, she won't be able to get down and look at individual jobs. So that's something that I've seen some customers use and give their management access. So if some manager wants to know how is the inventory ordering process going, instead of calling someone or maybe looking at some custom created report, here's a web-based interface that will tell you real time what's going on. So with that, that completes the demo portion. And let me switch back to the slides here. So self-service is also available through on the mobile devices, and you can currently we support the Apple iOS and the Google Android platform. Once you have self-service, these are just free apps that you can download, and the functionality through the app is definitely not as full-featured as the web itself, which is often the case with most apps. But this is still pretty good to take a look at the status. You can still view output of the jobs or the sysout. So pretty neat. We're seeing a lot of interest from the customers who have deployed self-service, and we're seeing quite a bit of traction with it. Some additional resources. Now, you may have seen quite a few things about self-service and others through BMC, but it's always more reassuring and often enlightening to hear how another customer succeeded with an implementation. So Unum Group, not too long ago, implemented self-service, and they saw a great return on investment in terms of saving the number of calls their help desk was getting for ad hoc requests and the status and, hey, can you rerun this job, or what happened to that particular flow. They were very successful with it, and they tracked multiple metrics in their environment to to measure that success. And they recently shared that story with a lot of other customers in a webinar. And that webinar was recorded and is available through bmc.com events page. So if you go to bmc.com/events or directly to /on-demand, or go to bmc.com/events and then click on demand, and look for the webinar by the name of Consumerization of IT. There's a lot of good information to hear from another customer who was successful with this. If you don't have self-service and want to try it, there is a trial available through bmc.com. You can just simply go to this URL and you'll just register, and you'll be provided with an environment where you can actually real-time play with self-service. And finally, I just want to thank you, everyone, and give you some more information on the recorded webinars. All the Connect with Control and webinars are available on bmc.com/events. In addition to that, on the BMC communities, if you go to communities.bmc.com, on the Control M page, you will see these recordings prominently featured on the main page. So this webinar will also be there in a few days, and all the previous ones we've done are available from the communities page as well. The next webinar in this series will be on June 19th. Control M version 8 Fixed Pack 1 has a lot of new exciting features that we will be talking about. I think these will be very informational, and if you're looking for reasons to make a case to upgrade to version 8, I think this will be very compelling. So at the end of this webinar, you will get a survey. As always, we are interested in your feedback on how this series is going and what other topics you want to see.